Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 1 of the Film Scorer podcast. This is Nick, the Film Scorer. Today I'll be talking with composer and musician Sean Carney. And before moving into film music, Sean was a jazz vocalist, a touring guitarist, a music teacher, a member of the bands Miscellaneous and of Wolves. So he's really had quite a broad, diverse career. To Hell and Gone is his first feature-length film score that came out near the end of 2019 and really, hit a couple festivals, but I think with the advent of the coronavirus, it really kind of stopped the film in its tracks for a little while. Now, Sean released his score in May or June of 2020, and it's a really fun kind of neo-Western score that has calls to Ennio Morricone and other spaghetti westerns, but also with a much more modern take on things. 2 words before we start. First, there are a couple swear words in this podcast. If that's something you're not comfortable with, now you know. And also, you'll notice that the audio quality of this interview isn't quite as high as this introduction or the prior introduction. And that's simply because I was using old equipment which has since been replaced. So the interviews going forward will be of a higher quality. This interview starts almost immediately with Sean asking me about the movie and my thoughts, and it goes from there. So sit back and enjoy.
Thanks for watching the film again. I really appreciate that, man.
Yeah, of course.
We're trying to get eyes on it. It's an indie film with no stars in it, so it's always hard to sell to somebody to watch,
Yeah.
especially somebody at like a big agency or something like that. So, really appreciate it. What did you think? What kind of things did you like or dislike?
Really pleasant surprise at how solid the production quality was, like throughout the entire way. Having like well done gunfights and having a plane throughout and all these. One thing I've noticed is when you have outdoor scenes, especially somewhere in the desert where there's not much cloud cover, like you can get really harsh sunlight that's gonna just totally ruin the lighting of a shot. And most of that movie takes place outside in the desert or somewhere desert adjacent. It all works. There's no point where I'm watching it and go, oh, okay, yeah, this was just a couple of guys doing their first or second feature. So it looked good, and I'm of the opinion, I see movies that have like 2.5, 3 hour run times, and I saw that this was 82 minutes. You know what? That's awesome. If you can tell your story in 82 minutes, great. Because it means that you've got it tight. It's not going to be bloated. There's not going to be like a B and C plot line that might or might not get resolved. You've got your story, and you're going to tell it, and that's it.
Man, that's an awesome observation. And you're more. I mean, I'm more willing to give a movie I don't know anything about a chance.
Yeah.
A little bit shorter. Yeah, man. So it was all shot on location in Arizona, actually. So my really good friend and bandmate of our band Miscellaneous, I'm wearing a shirt right now. So so his name's Kyle Moore. He plays piano brilliantly, and he's an amazing filmmaker, director, editor, producer. He wrote the script with a buddy. Kyle actually went out to Arizona to visit a really good friend, Carr Cavender, who produced the movie as well. So Carr has this big ranch property out in the middle of nowhere in Arizona. And I think Kyle went on there. Yeah, he went on a trip just to like check it out and just fell in love with the location. And they had this access to a plane. And so all the things kind of started bubbling for those guys. And they're like, okay, this is the movie using this location. So they did a couple runs out there, like location scouting shoots. Like, okay, what scenes do we have? And they just like took a bunch of footage. put it together, and they were like, cool, we're going to use this place for this scene. And so they kind of like backwards engineered the movie based on the location, which I thought was pretty neat. Yeah, it was just a really interesting situation. Yeah.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense because I saw it was I think it was like crowdfunded on Indiegogo and it raised
Yep.
like 200 grand, which for like an indie like family drama, where it takes place in a house or something, like that's a good amount. But I was like, how did they, how they get access to a plane? How are they able to do all these on location shots? And that makes a lot of sense. I don't know. I think there's a little like tension there because I think it's nice to write like a script and make the movie that you want without any sort of conditions. But at the same time, you have to, especially when you have a really low budget, you have to be conscious of those restrictions. So to be able to see, oh, we have access to this ranch land to an airplane, let's use that to make a movie. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And so Kyle, man, he's crazy. He's a really creative dude, and a lot of locations that he just places that he visits in life. He's like, oh my god, like right here, this could be the scene where whatever, and it's just cool, man. So I could definitely see him doing some more movies like that in the future based on the location, which is interesting.
So then that's obviously how you got brought in to do the score, being Hispanic.
Exactly. And then actually Carr, our producer, had a stint in Miscellaneous, the band, as our drummer.
Oh,
He's a musician as well. So I knew him really well. And so it was just nice, like working with friends, like putting the project together. And we actually, one of the first festivals that we got into with this film was in Tucson, which was really close to where they shot the movie in Arizona. And I had never been out there because I wasn't, I'm just post
right.
production through the score. But I went out to this festival with them. We all drove out, and it was so fun and like so full circle for me to see like scenery that I've scored
Yeah.
to for like, I don't know, 6 months or whatever, however long it took me to see it in person. It was like a total full circle moment, which was like super cool.
Cool. So were you familiar at all with that area beforehand, or I mean, was your first experience basically by seeing the footage?
Yep, seen the footage. Yeah, I did some research in the of the area as well, just like what happened around there, what's going on around there. So we really set out to make a western. Like they set out to make a western film, modern day western, and so we wanted the score to have some of those spaghetti western elements going on, but with like a more modern twist to it because it is set in present day or in some weird,
It's modern enough, right?
yeah, modern day. So I did some research about like, the Native American tribes around there and tried to incorporate some of those elements from their music, especially like in that region of Arizona as well, because a lot of spaghetti westerns draw from the more California
Hmm.
uh, Indian, Native American tribes. And so I wanted to like grab some stuff that people wouldn't really hear in a western and kind of make it more specific to that region, I guess.
That's interesting because one of the things that stuck out to me was the use of percussion, and especially the like how it sounded,
Yeah.
because it's really common in movie scores when you're having an action sequence or a more kind of like high intensity one that you're going to have kind of like a frantic tense drumming, and it will often sound really similar across scores. So listening to the score and watching the film, it really stuck out to me that like, oh, this is a really distinct, different sound from so many other scores I listen to.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to use a whole lot of like stock sounds for a movie score because it's also indie, and I wanted the score to have like a lot of character to it as
Mm,
well. But yeah, man, I played a lot of these drums live just in my studio,
really?
and like ran it through my guitar pedals, and like that was that more modern flair, I guess. But it was cool, man. I listened to a ton of Native American music I'd never heard before. I actually wrote a lot of the score when I was up in Alaska. I was just visiting, and I just went on some walks and kind of got like a lot of the main themes down. And just like being out just with these massive mountains, like it didn't put me in Arizona, but it put me in like nature, you know, and I felt like a lot of the movie had to do with
Mhm.
interacting with nature. So I wanted to try to try to capture that as well. So,
That's really interesting, and I think that really comes through particularly strongly, like I mentioned to you earlier, in those scenes where it's kind of just traveling through the wilderness, where it's basically just image and music. You know, there's not much action or dialogue. It's just the marriage of those two, and I think like those were definitely some of the strongest moments.
thanks. Yeah. It was super fun, man. It was my first feature I've ever done too. So I was like, you know, chomping at the bit, like
Yeah.
really excited.
So I mean, because of that, then I take it like you didn't have a sort of like composing ritual down. You know, you hadn't done a dozen features and like worked out your process for it. I mean, what was your approach to doing this as your first one?
So just all wrong. Just totally wrong. Just everything I started was just wrong. And so I had to, yeah, you're right. I mean, I had to figure out my own personal workflow and organization system. Um, you know, on the technical side, on the creative side, everything. And it took a while to get into the groove. And I did some things at the beginning where I'm like, why did I do that? I just wasted so much time, you know. But it was great. I mean, now that I have that experience under my belt, actually every film that I've done, short film that I've
Mm.
done, is this one. I'm like, okay, gonna do this first. Like, not gonna do this other bullshit that took forever.
Right. So I mean, what was looking back then? What was like the if you could boil it all down, like the process you would have done starting from day one?
I mean, okay, to be honest, I think I did a lot of things well. Like, okay, writing the themes
Mm.
first. Got to write the themes first. What? Why would you even? Why? Why would you even try to write a movie score if you don't have your themes figured out? And I had most of them figured out, but I think I got a little bit ahead of myself before I really had them ironed out the way that I
Mm.
want. So I'd have to go back in and like reharmonize some things or like retool the melody, re-record whatever, and that sucked. Figuring out the workflow and logic for a project that's that size was interesting,
Mm.
and it's just with with like the tempo adjustment within Logic. Like I have the movie like going in there. This is so like nerdy and technical, but whatever. I guess it's the whole point of this interview.
Exactly.
But it's just like I put in something, and if I adjust something that is before the score that I am currently working on, everything gets fucked up because it's all mapped to the tempo. So I just had to talk to a bunch of composers. I read a
Mm.
bunch of books that I've never read before, and that was invaluable information. And like just little tiny tricks like that. I talked to this other composer was that said, don't do the built-in metronome kind of mapping thing. Man, just record audio of a metronome and just put that in there. And that way you'll be able to just shuffle around, slide, especially with a huge project like that. You know? Just little tiny things that save literally hours of work.
Wow.
It's just crazy.
And
But
then, you know, now in after doing all that, you can appreciate how somehow Ennio Morricone did like 500 scores over 50 years.
oh my god, yeah, it's so impressive, man. So impressive.
And so, and you know, speaking of him, who were some of the spaghetti western composers, or what were some of the films that you watched to kind of get in the zone and draw some inspiration from?
Yeah, of course. I definitely went back to Ennio. Good, Bad, and the Ugly, one of the best film scores of all time.
Mm.
I definitely, I def was. It's such a weird score. It's so strange. The instrumentation of it, like the use of vocals as well in that score, is just like, what the hell are you? What are you doing? What are you on right now? It feels like a peyote trip, like the whole thing. Not that I've ever done that, but yeah. So definitely went back to all those old movies. Yeah, I sat down and I definitely went back and listened to a lot of those. There were some other things. The Breaking Bad score
Mm.
was actually something that I listened to for inspiration, and that was something that Kyle, the director, and I talked about before we did it. because it has this, I don't know, it's got this electronic kind of thing to it, but it also has, I don't know if it's like a tribal or like native kind of flavor to it that ties the story of that whole thing together like
Right.
so brilliantly.
And I'm not gonna have the hot take of saying, Breaking Bad is a Western. But at the
Yeah,
same time, like it is anything that's set in the American Southwest is automatically gonna have like some parallels to it. So, when you have what's it set in Albuquerque, I think, like an Albuquerque crime show, that's gonna have some analogs to an Arizona crime film. Even if you're getting technical and the genres are different, there's still crossover between the two. So that makes sense.
yeah. I think that's exactly it. Trying to capture whatever that essence of Arizona is. Yeah, and just the way that score was approached, the Bad score in a modern day setting, which was like really interesting to have out there. So yeah, it's basically Breaking Bad meets Ennio Morricone. Like it's literally what we talked about before we started scoring. And then once we got into it, it kind of developed its own identity.
Mhm.
We were able to make some choices to be like, oh, well, this happened earlier in the film, or this happens later, and then it has its own voice to Hell and Gone as a score as we
Yeah,
move.
well, and I think that's one of the interesting things about the scores. You hear some instrumentation that's like it's much more obviously like callback or influenced by those. Like some of the whistling. You hear Western whistling, and you're automatically going to think of those films. But at the same time, at least like kind of my take when listening to it is, as the film progresses, the score goes from a much more like Western acoustic bass, and the electronic influences get more and more apparent, and some of the instrumentation that was really clean early on feels kind of distorted and modified, and so it takes on the whole atmosphere of this movie just like grading into violent chaos.
Man, thank you for picking up on that, man. That's exactly what I actually set out to do with this.
Hmm.
Is I wanted the villains to be electronic instruments, and I wanted the heroes to have the acoustic instruments. And then once they meet, like kind of all bets are off. That was very intentional for sure, and it's awesome to hear someone like pick up on that. So that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that was intentional because I didn't want to sound like a total idiot reading too much into it. But
Oh
I mean,
man,
I think it works really well, and it's especially like you mentioned, because for anyone who hasn't seen it, the first maybe third or half of the film, you kind of have these two narratives going side by side, where you have your villains going on their path and your protagonists going on their other, and then like they clash, and that's like it really sets up that musical clash and kind of amalgamation in the second half of the film.
that's it, man. Yeah, and I felt like there was something really menacing that I was getting with the electronic sound, so
Mm.
I just leaned into it the whole way with all of the villains, and they all kind of had their own little things happening. Crazy story. I I'm a session guitarist. I play in bands, whatever, and I was out on the road with a band that I play with regularly, and we have a horn section, and there's a trumpet player. Been friends with this guy for years, and we okay, I mean, I'll tell you the whole story. So we got in the night before the gig. We ordered a bunch of weed, okay, a bunch of weed, and none of it showed up on Weed Maps, and we are like, ah, man, bummer. So we have like this afternoon gig the next day, and we get to the gig. It's this outdoor festival, beautiful festival in San Jose, and right as we finish our set, we get off stage, and the Weed Maps guy shows up with just the most amount of weed ever. And we have like 4 hours until our plane leaves. And we're like, okay, let's just get really high, just finish all this before we leave. So we finish all of it before we leave, walk around this park, and we're in the airport in this super resonant space and just random place. We're like super baked, and Matt, the trumpet player, starts whistling, and when he whistled, he has an old west whistle. He makes one sound, and you're just like, oh my god, cowboys, tumbleweed, in there immediately. And I was like, holy shit, how long have you been able to do this? I've been scoring a Western for the past like 4 months, dude. And I literally, I was looking for somebody to whistle. I was resorting to Craigslist, like, because I can't whistle at all. And for him to just have that sound just right off the bat, I was just like, dude, this is crazy. So I was like, hey man, come over next week. He plays trumpet as well, so all the trumpet lines you hear on the score are him. Brilliant musician, Matt Matera, Peabody trained, reads music like nobody's business. He's awesome. So I wrote all these whistling parts for him. He came in and laid it down, and it just like changed everything.
That's awesome.
Changed the whole score. It was so crazy. Sorry, I had to tell that whole story.
Oh man, that's great though. It's so cool that it happened in that window too. It was like divine intervention.
It was the strangest thing, man. It was so weird. Yeah, I felt like a lot of things surrounding this movie and surrounding the score had very like serendipitous, like I don't know, just events. Like the fact that we're shooting in this property that's owned by the producer and his family. Like the fact that we have that, as you said, in the first place is crazy.
Yeah.
Like, so nice. Anyway, talking so much.
That's the point, though.
I guess it is.
If you gave one-word answers, this would be not only the shortest, but the most boring interview that's ever been done. So, yeah, don't worry at all.
Okay, cool. That's the score in a lot of ways.
That's great. And you said you've done short films before. I mean, how did those two experiences compare?
Man, I mean, it's just 100 times more work. And I think the whole my score is available on Spotify and iTunes as well. I'm just going to say that on this one as well. And there's maybe 25 tracks or something like that, but when it really came down to it, I probably did 60 tracks, probably between. And another funny thing we did too is we just had to record all these commercials, just random commercials. So I hired some voice actors, and we just wrote a ton of just super random commercials we could just stick in. So this commercial opens up the whole. It's the first thing you hear in the movie.
There's a new sheriff in town. He walks with pride, confidence, and a little attitude. He protects the weak and stands up tall for what he knows is right. But there's one question everyone's dying to know. Hey, partner, where'd you get those boots?
Come on down to Boot Complex with the best deals in town for all your boot needs. We've got hunting boots, cowboy boots, army boots, rain boots, work boots, motorcycle boots,
and much more. This weekend only. Come on down to Boot Complex.
Yeah, so you get the idea. We did a whole bunch of, oh man, this one's silly too.
They're not in the kitchen. They're not in the living room. They're not under this rock. They're not in this canyon. Who could have stolen my delicious crunchy oat cereal? Wahahaha! It was me, Crunch Grabber. Oh no, not Crunch Grabber. Yes, and now this crunchy oaty goodness is all mine. I can just taste it now. With this nutritional and
anyway, so yeah, we just had a bunch of these because the main character had this radio that was kind of a theme, and at any point it had to go to commercials. So we didn't even use. I think we probably used like 3 out of the 6 or 7 that we made, but it was just a nice thing to have to jump to, once whatever was happening on the radio happened. Yeah, so
I'm actually really glad you showed those, because I think most people, like, me included, you don't really, unless it's something that's so upfront, you don't even think about all those extra things that go on.
Not at all. And in the, man, we did this super indie, because, like, we could have just gone on libraries as well, but there's something really charming about just creating our own thing. I actually did a bunch of mariachi music cues as well, because there's this, like, Mexican restaurant, and they needed like 4 songs to show like time passing. So I just did like 4 mariachi songs really fast. When these appear in the movie, they're just like totally filtered out, way in the background. Like you can't even really make out what's going on. I just sang some random Spanish poetry I found online. I mean, it's just ridiculous filmmaking, man. It's like because it's all just in the background. Like no one's really gonna be like, wait a second, what's he talking about? It's just like atmosphere, man. It's so crazy what you can get away with.
It's funny because that's it. You know, the diner scene, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
and so I noticed that there's music going on,
Mhm.
but it's like you said, it's so in the background and filtered out that you recognize it, and then it just kind of disappears into the scene. I mean, it's funny, and it's something that no one's gonna realize that you made, you know, 4 like minute or 2 minute long songs in order to beef that up.
Yeah. But it was fun. Yeah. And when Kyle, we first had our spotting session, we watched the whole movie top to bottom. And man, that's a really fun part of filmmaking is the spotting session. It's like we watch the whole thing for the first time together with the director, and we go, okay, music. It feels like there should be music here, right? Okay, cool. Let's put some music here, and it stops here, and then okay, here's some dialogue. Okay, oh, there should be some music here. So I really enjoyed that. When I was putting this together with Kyle for the first time, he was like, all right, he paused it on the diner scene, and he's like, I have a big ask for you, and I'm like, all right, Kyle, what's up? And he's like, I need 4 mariachi songs, and I'm like, oh. And I was like, cool, let's do it.
Were you taken aback at first? Like, all right, how do I do mariachi music in the first place? Or, you know, were you comfortable enough with your background and the various projects you have that you were like, okay, I can do this?
I gotta say, living in LA, I hear mariachi music daily, so I was like, cool. I'm pretty sure, like, I know what's gonna happen. It's not the best mariachi music in the world, but it's passable and it sounds like it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. There wasn't a point where I was like, oh, what? This scene's getting ruined.
Totally.
There's one other thing I wanted to ask, and you mentioning reading a random Spanish poem jogged my memory. In the first track on the release, I think it's Dead Record.
Yeah.
There's sort of muffled chanting going on.
Yeah.
And are they actually saying anything, or is it just like a nonsense vocalization?
Yeah, it's me just doing a nonsense vocalization. Very much styled in an Ennio Morricone kind of way. I'm not sure if I mean I'm sure that he's using actual phrases in his scores, but I was like, I just need the effect. I'm a vocalist. That's like one of my main things that I do. So it was fun to find little spots to add some and listening to all these native vocal styles as well was really fun and trying to emulate that. And then of course like trying to throw some kind of modern twist on the whole thing was cool.
I mean, that's awesome. And so I take it that was also your vocals on the bonus track.
Yeah, yeah. So that was yeah. So I had scored the instrumental for the gunfight scene, and I was like, man, like I don't know where this chord progression came from, but it just sounds like an old cowboy song or something. And then I was just up late one night scoring the film, and I just wrote lyrics and just recorded a vocal as an option, either in that scene or just I kind of had the idea of releasing it on Spotify and iTunes, and I was like, it'd be cool if there was like an alternate just at the end that was just like one song, original song from the motion picture.
I think it works really well in this case, especially coming at the end, because I was listening to it, I don't know, maybe this morning or yesterday. I was like, gosh, I don't remember if that was actually in the film or not. It sounds familiar, but not completely familiar. But I immediately went to the credits because I was like a vocal track doesn't really fit elsewhere, but it would be totally fitting for the 3-4 minute long credit sequence.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it could have worked as a credit thing. You know, if it was a longer credit sequence, like it could have worked a little better. But yeah, I mean, that's exactly why I put it on there. People ask questions and like, what the hell? Where did this come from? Like, who's singing on this? What's going on? So I like adding those kinds of things.
It worked out well. I mean, and so earlier you said that you did 60 tracks or so for the film, and there's, I don't know, 20, 25 that make it onto the soundtrack. So, I mean, obviously there was picking and choosing, especially with throwing the vocal track on. I mean, what was the process on making the release?
Yeah, it was something I definitely had to think about when I was putting together the soundtrack. What's going to be on it, what's not. And I did it in chronological order from the movie. I left a couple things out because I wanted from start to beginning of the actual soundtrack to be this experience. So everything kind of flows into each other. And I actually had to like touch up a couple ends and beginnings of some of the score tracks to make it to have that feeling. So someone can just put it on or like be out on a walk or something and just listen to the whole thing seamlessly. I've I what's the Tom York score that he released recently? I can't think
Did
of it.
Suspiria, I think.
Suspiria, that's what it
Yeah.
is. You know, anything that guy does or anything Radiohead does, it's like it's the whole thing is like a cohesive experience, man. I really dig that about long form, music.
Hmm.
That's what I was thinking, and I didn't want to have any of the mariachi stuff in it because I think it would kind of kill the vibe. And
Yeah.
there's other things that I'm like, it's just kind of too short, or I kind of accomplishing this thing in another track.
I mean, that makes sense. If you do a like a deluxe re-release in the future, you could put in the commercials and the mariachi music and throw everything in. I feel the same way for a film score release of it being a cohesive listen because especially if you have it on in the background and then a mariachi song comes on, it's totally throw you out of it. I also appreciate that it's 25, 30 minutes long. There's nothing that feels too abrupt, but like it doesn't overstay its welcome either. It's a really nice balance. For a Star Wars score that's an hour and a half, great. I'll listen to that. I'll listen to 2 hours. I'll listen to 2.5 hours. But that's such a rare piece of composing.
Yeah, on a 3-hour movie too, so
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
twice as much score at least. Man, those Star Wars movies, there's always something happening in the score. Always something happening at all times, especially in a very bad way. Oh man, I shouldn't be talking shit, but in a bad way with the reboot ones from the 2000s. Man, there's just some kind of score happening at all times. I'm just like, man, I just need a break. Somehow I need to get rid of Jar Jar Binks. And it's like, yeah, I'm just kidding.
Fortunately, I don't think I've seen those since they were out in theaters.
Yeah, they're bad. They're really bad.
Yeah, I don't think you're gonna catch too much flack from anyone for not being a fan of those.
Yeah, I guess. Anything else, man?
No, I mean I think that touches on kind of so much of just like of the score, the process, the film itself, and your work too. I guess and one follow-up thing is that being your first feature, like, do you have any other coming out on the horizon?
I do, yes. I'm working on a short horror film with a couple of friends of mine out here. Not really sure when it's going to be released. It's still in the post-production phase, but the score is really awesome. It's my first horror film score, and I'm a huge horror movie nut. So it was like, yes, finally I get to do it. And I really hope to do some more of this stuff too, because I like doing music that's a little darker, a little edgier. So it was really fun to find those moments in this new film. It's called OK Plus, by the way. Look out for that. I'll send you a link.
Yeah, let me know. And maybe this was starting like 3 or 4 weeks ago. I actually started writing an article series on short film music in particular. So like I'm trying to do it that it got more interest than I expected. So I'm trying to do it monthly where I cover about like 6 short films because now that I've started getting into it, there are infinite short films and I don't think people cover them enough. So I'm trying to give them a little bit of coverage at least.
That's cool, man. Especially right now, everyone has so much time to sit down and everyone's just watching stuff. I'm watching so many more things that I would have not watched, especially older things, man, like going back and watching some of the really great movies. And that's been cool because we've been so saturated with things coming out that aren't that good, things coming out that aren't that good, things coming out that aren't that good. And so it's like when you go back and you see the real things that stood the test of time, you're like, okay, all right, this is what content is. This is what a movie is. It's just like really cool.
It's so true. Last year I listened to something around like 750 or so scores that released in 2019 So that's, 750 films that released in 2019. And like, you can imagine that in 50 years, how many of those are people going to be talking about? It's going to be a handful, and presumably the best of them. So then when you take a film from 1950 or 60 or 70 that like was it a year with hundreds of releases, and that's one that people still talk about, you go, gosh, there's got to be something about it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's just the workmanship. You can't rush a quality product. You cannot rush. That's the thing you lose, quality. Yeah. With just all these crazy deadlines of Netflix, like, oh, we gotta release something today because you as a consumer have already watched all our other shit. Here's something new. It's not that good, but here you go.
It'll fill your appetite for the next 2 hours.
Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a musician recently who grew up in the 80s and he hated 80s music. He was just like, this is just the worst fucking music of all time. So he went back. He went back to the 60s and 70s and listened to all those albums and was like, okay, all right, cool. Like, this is great stuff. I don't know. It's just a thing I thought of.
No, but that's awesome. I think people have an issue of how a lot of music today has, homages to prior decades. Like, I think having all of the 20th century's music available now, or all the 20th century's movies available, it gives you so much to be inspired from or learn from. If you hear like a killer idea or see something amazing, you can learn from it. So I don't know. I think that's really cool. I mean, there's unlimited good content out there already, and if you're not looking at it, you're really missing out.
You're right, man. I mean, that's it too. There's endless inspiration out there, especially in this older stuff, man, where they had to figure it out. Like they didn't even have computers. How the hell did they do that? They really had to figure it out in order to make this great concept. And the concept had to be great enough for them to innovate and develop something where they could capture that concept. Yeah. But nowadays it's like we have the ability to capture it, but we're choosing to capture the other things that aren't of high quality. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, man. It's crazy. There's some good stuff coming out. I just saw, what did I watch the other day? I mean, it came out a while ago, but I thought Bird Box was really cool.
I haven't seen that. It was like the biggest Netflix show whenever it came out, and somehow apparently both of us totally missed the craze like a year and a half ago at this point, I think.
Yeah, I missed the hype on most things, and I watched like way after. That was definitely one of those. It was the first time I've seen it, but it was cool. It was really cool. It's a great movie.
Well, I'll keep my eyes open for it. I have the issue of selection fright. I have maybe 5 different streaming subscriptions.
Yeah.
And so it's like if I watch like 3 movies a week, how do when I have the option of 10,000 movies, like how do I pick one? I tell people that I'm going to add it to my watch list, and I realize like my watch list is like 500 movies.
Yeah. Yeah, man, there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there.
Before I let you go, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, totally unrelated to all this.
Cool.
You went to Western, right?
I did, yeah.
I went to U of M.
No way, my mom went to U of M.
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Another crazy thing, our director Kyle is from Chicago. There's a serendipitous Chicago connection. There you go, right there.
It's wild.
I saw you were from there. I was like, cool. I'm gonna tell you that on the interview that Kyle is from Chicago.
I'm not from there. I'm a very new transplant. I'm taking his place. He left and I moved.
There you go. Yep. Well, right on, man. I'm gonna get going here, but thank you so much for having me. This is super fun.
Thanks for jumping on. I'm really happy that not only were you open to doing a video interview, but that you suggested it, because it's something I've had on my mind for a long time, because it's such a better way to talk and kind of get ideas out there. I really appreciate it.
How did you find me, by the way? Or how did you find out about the film?
Every Friday is generally when new film scores get released. And so
Sure.
I use this website called soundtracks.net that typically tracks the release date of every like new score, every re-release, every TV, game, short film score. This is going to sound really nerdy. I have all these lists on my computer broken down by month. I write down every score that comes out. As I listen to it, I take little notes. And then when the month's over, I'll revisit the list and write about a handful of them. I saw that score on there. I checked it out and I enjoyed it.
Man, so cool. That's awesome. I love that. I got to be honest. I was like, cool, I'm just going to release my film score. Like, I want to share with my family and friends, like, and I want it to be like out in the world just so check it out if they stumbled upon it. But it's really cool, man, to hear that you are specifically seeking to listen to film scores. That's really rad. Cool, man. I'll check it out.
You can search by film or by composer, so you can search yourself on there and it'll pop up with Helen Gone.
Crazy. I'm gonna who the hell? Who does it? Who's doing it?
I don't know, but it is without this, like I wouldn't be able to do 90% of what I do. But whoever it is, bless you, because it's such an amazing service.
Wow, what a cool resource. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you know about any other ones like this? Or I'm sure you do.
That's the only one that I know of. Like I said, in 2019, I listened to about 750 releases from that year, and 95% of them came from there. Like I follow some film music focused record labels, and so sometimes I'll see like they'll mention a release that's not on there, or I follow a lot of different composers, so sometimes they'll mention they have a release coming out. That thing is so all encompassing.
Yeah, cool. I'm gonna dig in. I'll check that out. That sounds great. Nicholas, great to talk to you, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thanks for jumping on, man. I really appreciate it. I have no idea what time it is, but whatever time it is, like this went for a lot longer than I expected in a very good way. So
cool.
I appreciate it, man.
I appreciate it too, man. The questions you had were really cool, and I feel like I got to share some really cool stories about how it came together.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I hope everyone listening enjoys them too, and hopefully some people listening are also fledgling composers or want to be film composers, so they can get far enough into where they hear your advice and save them a few hours here and there.
Hey, man, I'm still, what was that, fledgling?
Yeah.
I'm very much fledgling, so, nice word. Cool. Well, awesome, man. And you just DM'd me on Instagram, right? You checked out the score and then...
Yeah, I had...
you.
So what had happened is I had gotten super behind on my monthly write-up. And so I did my one for June like a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago. And so I had an Instagram story mentioning your score.
Okay.
And then you contacted me about it right after that.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yes, I remember that now. Yeah. That's rad, man. I really hope that you find more composers to talk about in this fashion.
I hope so too. And I think obviously huge name composers like Hans Zimmer and John Williams get onto any publication or website or like show they want. But that's like a small group of the composers. And then I think there's so many other people who do such good work that don't make it into that echelon. And people aren't as interested in writing about them or talking with them. I think there's a lot of people who want to talk about their work. I mean, hell, you take, this is a score you worked on for 6 months. There's so much about it that you don't want to just keep inside and never really talk about it. Yeah. I'm hoping so too.
That would be the word of advice for any fledgling composer is just take these opportunities to talk to people about your score, about your project, about your music, or else nobody knows. And
what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna like cut out just that snippet and use it as some good self-advertising.
Yeah, you definitely should, man. All right, dude, I'm gonna roll, but really good talking to you.
Yeah, it's great talking to you too. Have a good evening, man, and a good weekend and everything.
All right, stay safe, man.
All right, you too.
All right, bye, Nicholas.